Montana Territory in 1878 stretched like a vast cloth torn by wind, wide and worn. Tobias Red stood on a rise above Elk Creek, where early summer water moved under a pale sun. He had grown used to this quiet, so used that it was the only thing he trusted. At 27, shaped by years driving cattle, his dark eyes stayed distant from the world. His mother died when he was 10. His father faded soon after, like a pine stripped by cold down to its core. Tobias learned early and hard that love was a form of loss. He tucked his rope into the saddle, brushed dust from his coat, and rode toward Elkridge, the small valley town he visited only for flour, salt, and cartridges. He never stayed longer than he had to. People, closeness, greetings, they were risks he had no wish to carry. That noon, Elkridge was busier than usual. The blacksmith's hammer rang, children ran through the street, a piano drifted through the cracked window of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Tobias stepped off his horse at the general store, shook the dust from his coat, and walked onto the porch. Noise rose at the far end of town. A shout, then hooves pounding hard against the ground. Tobias turned just in time to see a wagon hurtling toward the square. Two horses wild with panic, mouths foaming, eyes wide. The driver fought the reins, but had no control. Dust rose in sheets, revealing her figure more clearly as the wagon rushed forward. A young black woman, hair pinned under a small hat, her face fine and steady. Her wide brown eyes held not fear, but the will to survive. She held the reins with strength far beyond her frame. That woman, whose name Tobias would learn later, was Thalia Vance. There was no time to think. His body moved before his mind did. He sprinted into the street, leaving shouts behind. The lead horse swerved, nearly knocking him down, but Tobias reached out and caught the rein. The pull wrenched his shoulder with sharp pain. The horse reared, its cry cutting the air. One more misstep and he would be crushed. Tobias clenched his jaw and used every ounce of force earned from storms and long drives. He hauled down, letting the animal's own weight work against it. A few breathless seconds passed. Then the wagon lurched, skidded, and finally stopped. Breath ragged, dust across his face, Tobias looked up. The woman on the seat met his gaze. Her eyes, warm, clear, seeing him and past him at once, knocked the air from his chest. She reached out her hand, small, steady. When he helped her down, their fingers touched. The moment was brief, but something strange moved through him, something rising from bone, not heart. He pulled his hand back as if from heat. Sheriff Tanner ran over, winded. "Thalia, you all right?" "Lord." "Thanks to him," Thalia said, her voice shaken but firm. "Without him." She turned to Tobias, her eyes holding a gratitude no words could carry. Tobias dipped his head, ready to leave. But Thalia called after him, her tone soft yet sure. "Mr. Red, at least let me buy you supper. A proper thank you." He stopped. He disliked entanglement, disliked being seen with eyes like hers. But when he turned and met her gaze, bright as sunlight on water, warm in a way he once believed was not meant for him, his guard loosened. Slowly, he nodded. 7:00, Wilson's restaurant, she said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. I'll be there." Tobias walked away, trying to turn his mind back to the long roads, the wind, the empty cabin. But for the first time in years, he was not quiet inside. A strange space opened in him, not empty from lack, but from the fear that something had just stepped in, and he had no idea what to do with it. Tobias Red did not understand why he stood at the water pool behind the livery stable late that afternoon, leaning over to see his face in the cold surface. He was not the sort of man who cared about appearance. Months on the trail had taught him that a dip of water and a quick scrub were enough. But tonight, for a reason he did not name, He washed with care. He shaved the rough stubble along his jaw, brushed his hair flat under his hat, and chose the clean shirt he kept for moments that required respect. Only when he fastened the last button did Tobias admit he was doing something he had never done: preparing for a woman. Wilson's restaurant glowed with warm lamplight when he stepped inside. The smell of fresh bread, coffee, and stew filled the room, mingling with low voices. All of it blurred when he saw her. Thalia Vance sat at a corner table near the window. She wore a simple beige dress, not elaborate, but when the light touched her smooth brown skin, the room seemed to change its pace. Her hair was pinned back, revealing fine features and deep brown eyes like creek water after rain. When she looked up, her smile soft and small, something slowed in Tobias's chest. "You came," Talia said, her voice warm as dark wood in sunlight. "I said I would," Tobias answered, trying to stay steady though his chest felt unsteady. They sat across from each other, the small table narrowing the space Tobias tried to guard. When the server brought their plates, the restaurant felt strangely private, as if the place held only the two of them. Thalia began quietly, her voice full of life. "I've been in Montana 2 weeks, staying with Aunt Evelyn. After my parents died in the epidemic." She said it without self-pity, but Tobias heard the quiet ache behind the words. He did not know how to comfort anyone, but something in him moved enough to say, "I'm sorry for your loss." Talia smiled, not to ease him, but with simple gratitude. "Thank you. Aunt Evelyn says Montana might be a beginning." "It could be," Tobias said. His short answers often came off sharp, but Talia did not retreat. "And you?" she asked. "Where do you live?" "Small cabin, Elk Creek," Tobias said, his hand brushing the table edge as if he could feel the empty cabin from here. "Drive cattle for money, little land, live alone." Talia nodded, her eyes free of judgment or pity, only listening. Then her gaze met his, brief, light, enough to make Tobias feel cold wind and warm fire at the same moment. He looked away. "You don't talk much," Talia said, half teasing. "I'm used to quiet." "Quiet is good," she replied, "but too much of it becomes lonely." She did not aim it at him, yet it struck the thought he had never spoken aloud. Tobias looked toward the window where night settled across the street. "Loneliness doesn't kill a man," he said. "No," Talia answered softly, "but it makes the heart shrink." In that moment, the lamplight, her voice, her breath, Tobias felt the urge to speak more, but had no place to begin. So the meal ended in small stories and brief glances, each one he pulled away from too soon. Outside, the night wind was cool like river water after a storm. Thalia raised her shawl, and Tobias, without thinking, lifted the edge to keep it from slipping. The touch was brief, but he let his hand fall a fraction slower. They walked to Aunt Evelyn's house. Under the porch light, Thalia turned to him. A breeze lifted a few loose curls across her cheek. "Thank you for tonight," she said, slow and calm. "I hope we meet again." Tobias could not recall if he answered. He remembered only the look in her eyes, unforced, unexpecting, a quiet question whether he might open even the smallest door inside himself. That night, in the small cot at the livery stable, Tobias lay on dry straw and did not sleep. Thalia's brown eyes, her quiet smile, and the warm stillness between them returned again and again, like waves brushing a stretch of sand long untouched. 3 weeks on the trail can make a man forget many things: the loose laughter of a small town, the smell of morning coffee, even the sense of a solid roof under his feet. But Tobias Red forgot none of it. He did not forget Thalia Vance's brown eyes, the way she tilted her head when she smiled, or the moment he set her shawl on her shoulders under the porch light. Sometimes at night, with the herd asleep and the wind drifting through the grass like an old whisper, her image slipped into his mind, quiet, unhurried, claiming a space he had not known was still empty. He did not know why. Or rather, he knew too well but did not name it. When the last of the cattle were delivered near the valley edge, Tobias sat in the saddle and looked toward Elkridge under the evening light. 3 weeks was not long, yet to him, it felt like 3 seasons. He meant to stop by the store for supplies and return straight to his cabin. But when he rode past the new schoolhouse, the sound of children reading A, B, C drifted through a window. Tobias had no reason to stop, yet his horse slowed on its own. Inside, through the sun-washed pane, Thalia stood at the board, chalk in hand, her shoulders slightly bent as she guided a small group. The late light caught in her curls, forming a soft ring around her face. She laughed when a pros misspelled a word, then patiently corrected each letter. Tobias felt something tighten inside. Not pain, not unease, just something slow and deep, like Elk Creek moving through spring. He stood there long enough for a boy to spot him and shout, "Miss Thalia, someone's at the window!" Thalia turned. Their eyes met. Nothing loud followed, but Tobias felt as if the wind had stopped. When class ended, Thalia stepped out with a stack of books. She did not hurry, did not rush. She simply looked at him as though she was glad to see him, but discreet enough not to say it. "You're back," she said, a quiet smile forming. "Came in this afternoon," Tobias answered, his fingers searching for a place to hold. Passing by, though he stood exactly at her door. "Was the drive all right?" she asked. "Fine. Cattle don't like storms." Tobias paused. "And you? You doing well?" The question sounded ordinary, yet he said it softer than he meant to, soft in a way he offered to no one else. Thalia nodded. "I'm fine. Aunt Evelyn keeps saying I work too much." Then she tilted her head. "Would you like to stop by for lemonade? She's home. And you, probably thirsty after the trail." Tobias should have refused. 3 weeks on the road left him wanting nothing more than a bed. But in that moment, refusing felt like stepping away from the small light he had just touched. "All right," he said. One word, yet it echoed inside him like summer knocking at the door. Aunt Evelyn's house stood at the corner of Pine Street, old roof, well-kept garden. When Thalia led him in, the older woman was Jetson, folding linens. She was near 60, her eyes sharp as a blade but warm as a stove. "Aunt Evelyn, this is Tobias Red. He's the one who stopped the wagon." She looked him over, gaze steady as if testing every defense he had built all his life. Then she nodded, small but clear enough. "I see you." "I've heard plenty," she said, pouring lemonade. "Thalia says you don't smile. Seems true." Tobias almost choked at her bluntness. Thalia laughed, her voice soft enough to brighten the room. They sat together, drinking lemonade in the Montana afternoon. A light breeze moved through the yard, carrying the scent of grass and sun. Thalia spoke about the school. Tobias told her about a calf that trailed him all night. Aunt Evelyn added remarks, half teasing, half wise. And Tobias, for the first time in years, felt he belonged somewhere, even for a short hour. Thalia's eyes drifted toward him now and then, never pressing, never demanding, only asking silently if he was all right. And Tobias, a man who lived like a shadow inside the wind, felt something stir where he once believed nothing remained. That day held no shouts, no storms, no runaway wagon. Only a warm afternoon and Thalia's brown eyes across a glass of lemonade. But it was that quiet that unsettled Tobias and drew him more than any storm ever had. That afternoon, Tobias came to the schoolhouse to fix the porch roof the wind had torn loose. He worked quietly, hearing only the hammer strike and the children reading inside. When the dismissal bell rang, the children burst out like birds freed from a cage. Thalia followed, a stack of notebooks in her arms. She wore her hair tied higher than usual, exposing the line of her neck, and a face warmed by the light, as if this place belonged to her. "Thank you for helping the school," she said, stopping close enough for Tobias to catch a faint mix of pine and mild soap around her. "It's just a roof," Tobias replied, turning aside to avoid her eyes. "Nothing much." Thalia studied him with calm understanding, as if used to the way he spoke less than what he meant. After a moment, she tilted her head. "Have you heard about the dance at Grange Hall this Saturday?" Tobias paused, tapping the hammer against the nail at a slower beat. "Heard." "Will you go?" she asked. The question sounded casual, but a quiet hope flickered in her eyes. "I don't care for gatherings," Tobias said, setting the hammer down. "Too many people. Too loud. Not for me." Thalia pressed her lips together, thinking. Then she stepped closer, close enough that Tobias felt his heartbeat slip a little. "I'll go," she murmured. "If you ask." Tobias went still, as if something inside him had been seized. No one had ever cornered him so gently, and yet so plainly. He let out a slow breath. "Thalia, you want me to ask?" She nodded, steady and sure. And Tobias, who usually spoke only to wind and horses, heard his own voice say, "Then, would you like to go with me?" Thalia's smile lifted like late sun breaking through a cloud. "I would." Grange Hall glowed bright when Tobias arrived that night. He came earlier than he needed, unsure what he was searching for in the fiddle notes spilling from the doors or the crowd chattering beneath the porch. But when Thalia appeared at the entrance, everything went quiet. She wore a deep green dress, the waist drawn gently and the skirt swaying with each step. Her hair was pinned up, a few curls falling along her cheek. The lights caught her brown skin, making her the warmest point in the room. Tobias couldn't recall if he swallowed or straightened his shirt. He remembered only the small smile she gave him, a smile strong enough to loosen the last piece of guard inside him. "You came," she said as she reached him. "Told you I would," Tobias answered, his voice rougher than his throat felt. The music began. Couples joined hands, turning across the wooden floor. Tobias meant to stay back and watch, but Thalia laid her hand on his arm, light, yet anchoring. "Come with me," she whispered. Not a command, not a plea. A simple want. One Tobias had never refused from her. He set his hand at her waist, close enough to feel her warmth through the cloth. Her hand rested on his shoulder. For a moment, Tobias felt her breath settle into his own. His body tightened, not from fear, but from not knowing how to steady himself against this kind of closeness. "You're tense," Thalia said softly, her mouth inches from his cheek. Tobias swallowed. "I'm no good at dancing." "I didn't ask you to be good," she said. "Just to be here." Just 2 words. Be here. Yet they shifted the rhythm of his heart. As they turned, he noticed people watching, townsfolks who knew him as a distant figure on a far ridge. Their glances held surprise, not judgment. Tobias, the man who kept to shadows, was dancing with the most striking woman in the room. When the song ended, they remained nearer than needed, their breaths still caught in the last echo of the waltz. Walking Thalia home, the night wind passed lightly through the ferns. They moved slow, neither wanting to disturb the quiet between them. At Aunt Evelyn's porch, Thalia faced him. Under the weak gold light, her brown eyes deepened. "Thank you, Tobias," she said, "for tonight, and for being with me." He opened his mouth to speak, but she was already lifting up on her toes, placing a soft kiss on his cheek. Brief, unhurried, enough to make Tobias, whose heart had survived long winters, hear the first knock of spring. She smiled and stepped inside, and Tobias, standing under the porch light, touched the place her lips had brushed and thought, maybe there was something here worth staying for. That morning, as Tobias led his horse down Main Street to buy new rope, Thalia stepped out of the market with a basket of apples in her arms. Early sunlight slipped through her curls, warming her brown skin to a honey glow. "Where are you headed?" she asked, her small smile carrying more warmth than a simple greeting. Tobias hesitated, as he always did before saying anything that revealed feeling. Then he drew a quiet breath. "If you have time," he said, "I'd like to take you to where I live." Talia blinked. Just that. Yet Tobias sensed something soften in her, as if the invitation was a rare door opening. "I have time," she said, "and I'd like to go." The road toward Elk Creek crossed wide fields. Wind moved through the grass in long waves, like the land breathing. Thalia sat beside Tobias on the old wagon, her skirt brushing his arm each time the wheels jostled. Those small touches were enough to make Tobias slow his breath, afraid any sudden motion might disturb this quiet. "The prairie is beautiful," Talia said, watching the horizon. "I'm used to it," Tobias replied. "Seen it so long, it stopped looking beautiful." Talia turned toward him, studying him with steady calm. "Then let me look for you. Maybe you just need different eyes." Tobias didn't answer, but something in his chest slipped out of rhythm, an irrational feeling he had avoided all his life. At the cabin, Talia stepped down first. Tobias's cabin was not large or handsome. Rough wood walls, worn shingles, the porch leaning after last winter. Yet in the afternoon light, it held the sense of a place shaped by hand, sweat, and the slow patience of a solitary man. Thalia walked in, her gaze taking in everything. The table he built himself, the rifle rack set straight on the wall, the old blanket from his father, the chipped clay cup he used every day. "You live simply," she said, "not as a judgment, but as understanding." "Just enough to get by," Tobias said. "Nothing worth seeing." "There is," Talia murmured, "pieces of you everywhere." That single sentence opened something in Tobias, small but real. They sat beside Elk Creek, where water ran over pale stones. Tobias often came here for quiet, but he had never brought anyone. Thalia slipped off her gloves, touched the water, then held her hand near his. "Cold," she said, a trace of mischief in her smile. Tobias meant to reply, but when her fingers brushed the back of his hand, he went still. A quick current ran through him, slight but sharp, like a blade loosening dust from a locked place in his heart. Thalia tilted her head. "You shivered." "Just the wind," he said. There was no wind. Thalia knew it. Tobias knew it. Yet neither spoke. She moved closer, close enough that their shoulders touched now and then as the water lapped the bank. "I noticed something," she said. "You live well enough to survive, strong enough, steady enough, but—" She paused, letting a breath of silence fall between them. "You've never lived to love." Tobias turned toward her, slow, careful, afraid that a long look might bring down every fence he had built. "Love," he said, "makes a man weak." "Or strong enough to stop running," Talia said. Her words fell between them, soft but sharp, like a pebble dropped into clear water, sending ripples to the bottom. Tobias looked at his hands. Hands used to reins and rifles, yet unfamiliar, resting still in a peaceful hour. He did not know what to say. But inside him, something shifted, small yet clear as Thalia's shadow on the water. Dusk settled over the valley, turning Elk Creek to a muted amber. Thalia leaned lightly against a rock, and Tobias sat beside her. They said nothing more, but the silence no longer carried distance. It carried understanding. Tobias watched the horizon blush, then looked at Thalia. In the late light, her face made him realize there were things a man could not outrun. Warmth, presence, and the want to reach for someone past fear. There was no confession that evening, no promise. But when they stood and walked back toward the cabin, Tobias knew. Something in him had turned, quietly, but for good. That evening, the wind shifted without warning. Heavy, wool-thick clouds rolled in from the western range, carrying the kind of storm Montana dropped without mercy. Tobias and Thalia were still looking over the patch of ground behind the cabin, where she hoped to plant spring yellow blooms, when the first sharp gust struck their backs. "We should get inside," Tobias said, his low voice edged with concern for her. A few steps later, the sky opened. Rain fell hard, as if the heavens had split. They ran to the cabin, slammed the door, breath catching in laughter and the rising warmth from their soaked clothes. Inside, the small cabin felt even smaller with the storm pounding the walls. Tobias lit the stove, his hands trembling slightly, part cold, part the nearness of Thalia in that closed space. The fire caught, throwing soft light across the room, warming everything it touched. Thalia settled near the hearth, palms open to the flame. Her curls were damp, a few strands clinging to her temple. The firelight slid across her brown skin, steady, gentle, something Tobias found impossible to look away from. "Come closer," she said quietly, her voice soft but clear enough to cut through everything he tried to hide. He sat beside her, leaving a polite space, though it was really to steady the storm inside his chest. Heat from the fire and from Thalia eased past his guard, slow and sure. Outside, the rain hammered down. Inside, only the crackle of fire and the sound of their breathing remained. Thalia turned slightly. "What are you thinking?" A simple question, but it reached the place Tobias kept locked the longest. He swallowed, breath uneven. "I'm afraid," he said, his voice rough. "Afraid of what?" Thalia asked, her tone gentle as a hand settling over a wound. "Of loving." Tobias looked away. "Afraid of losing, of turning into my father. He loved my mother so much that when she died, he didn't last long after." Thalia didn't answer. She waited, quiet enough that Tobias found himself saying more than he meant. "I always thought love was weakness," he breathed. "A way to be broken." "And now?" she asked, not pushing, only offering space. Tobias turned to her. For the first time, he didn't look away. In the sound of rain, in the fire's reflection in her steady brown eyes, Tobias heard his own heart speak for him. "Now, I'm afraid, because I love you." Talia's fingertips touched his cheek, light, warm, enough to make him tremble at something he never believed he could have. "I'm here," she whispered. "I choose you." It wasn't a promise. It was truth. Quiet, simple, whole. Tobias lifted his hand and placed it over hers. "I don't know how to love," he said, voice breaking. Thalia's smile was tender, sure. "Then let me teach you." They came together not with the rush of desire, but with the slow certainty of two souls who had been alone too long and had finally found a place to rest. Wet clothes slipped away, not with haste, but like setting aside old defenses. Tobias touched her with the caution of a man unsure he deserved such gentleness. Thalia touched him with the calm of someone who knew exactly whom she loved. Words faded. Hands found hands. Breath found breath. Two bodies searched for warmth long missing. Firelight rose along Thalia's soft brown skin, along Tobias's strong shoulders. Across the moment they became each other's, not because of the storm outside, but because the storm inside them had finally found a place to settle. That night, the small cabin became a home. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Thin sunlight slipped through the shutters, falling across Thalia's face as she slept against Tobias's chest. Her hand rested over his heart, right where he had let her in the night before. Tobias didn't sleep, not from worry, but because he didn't want to miss a single moment of the first morning they belonged to each other. She stirred, lifted her gaze to him. "Good morning," she murmured, voice still touched with sleep. Tobias bent to kiss her forehead, a kiss he no longer resisted or second-guessed. "My life," he said softly. "Just changed." Thalia smiled, tightening her hand over his. So did mine. Outside, the Montana sun rose on a new beginning, and inside the cabin, two hearts, once built only for survival, had chosen to live for love. A week after the storm that changed everything, the Elk Ridge Valley settled into a strange calm. Clear skies, soft light, Elk Creek running easy, as if the land itself had slowed to watch two people who had just found each other. Thalia returned to her teaching, but her steps were lighter, her eyes brighter, and at times, when no one looked, a quiet smile rose like a secret she could not hide. Tobias was the opposite. Inside him ran a current both clear and frightening. Happiness, yes. Peace, yes. Yet somewhere an old voice still whispered, "You don't get to keep joy for long." That afternoon, when Tobias came to walk Thalia home, a habit that had formed with surprising ease, he saw a stranger's wagon before the schoolhouse. A man in a long coat stood beside Thalia, handing her a sealed letter. Tobias slowed, his heartbeat slipping. When the man left, Thalia stayed on the steps, gripping the envelope, surprise and uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Tobias," she said as he reached her, "we need to talk." They walked toward the small park down the street. The late breeze played with the curls along her cheek. Tobias waited, afraid to ask, afraid to assume. Under the old birch tree, Thalia opened the envelope. "It's from Helena," she said softly. "The city's education board is offering me a permanent teaching position, with good pay." Tobias looked at the letter, but he was really watching her fingers tremble, a rare sight. "I didn't think they noticed my work," she said. "Only a few months in Elk Ridge and—" "You earned it," Tobias said, his voice dropping low. "Your skill, your heart, everyone sees it." "That almost makes me cry," Thalia whispered with a thin smile, though a shadow lingered in her eyes. "Tobias, this could be a real chance, a position teachers dream about." Tobias nodded. He knew, he understood. That knowledge tightened something deep inside. "So you'll go?" he asked, steady on the surface, though fear moved under the words. Thalia met his gaze, brown and deep as water after rain. "I don't know," she said slowly. "But Tobias, these past nights, I haven't slept well." "Because of work?" he asked, though he knew better. No, Talia said, stepping closer. Because of you. Tobias felt his heart skip. I think about you, about the cabin by Elk Creek, about the way you look at me like the whole world can quiet for one moment. He swallowed hard, torn between opening and folding back into himself. Thalia, he murmured. I'm afraid, she said. Afraid that if I leave for Helena, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Because I walked away from whatever this is. But if I stay, I fear I might take something from you instead. Your future, your chances, or the freedom you've lived with for so long. Tobias looked down at his calloused hands, the same hands that once stopped a runaway wagon, the same hands that trembled against her skin in the storm. Now they didn't know whether to hold on or let go. Thalia, he said, voice slow as breath. I don't want you missing your chance because of me. You deserve the whole world, better than my rough life. She stepped close enough that their breaths mingled. You think I came to Montana for something easy? She asked quietly. Or you think my heart is too weak for whatever hardship lives out here? Tobias had no answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he feared that speaking would reveal the truth he tried so hard to bury. Thalia lifted his hand, pressing it gently to her cheek. I chose you once already, she said. That night in the rain, it wasn't a mistake. It was real. Tobias tightened his fingers around hers, a reflex born from a man losing his balance. But Helena, he said, voice catching, that choice is yours. And I'm asking my heart, Thalia replied, not ambition. He leaned forward, his forehead brushing hers. Not a kiss, not an embrace, just the fragile space where two people held each other through breath alone. Wherever you go, Tobias said, I won't hold you back. But I also don't know how to live if I lose you. Thalia closed her eyes for a brief ache, then said, We haven't lost each other, Tobias. But there's a question between us now. A soft wind swept past, carrying a single late-season leaf. They stood there, close yet standing at opposite edges of a choice, and neither knew where the answer would lead. A few days after their talk about Helena, Tobias wandered the prairie with a weighted heart. He had never expected to step into anyone's life, much less allow someone into his own. But after the night in the cabin, Thalia had become part of every breath, every waking hour, every sunset falling over Elk Creek. And he knew something had to be said. That afternoon, Tobias went to the schoolhouse. Thalia was arranging books, a loose curl falling from her bun after a long day. When she saw him in the doorway, she smiled, a smile that tightened his chest nearly to breaking. You came for me? She asked softly. I came to say something, Tobias said, his low voice carrying a faint tremor. Thalia set the books down and looked at him, gentle, steady. I'm listening. Tobias stepped closer, each step a push through years of holding the world at arm's length. He took her hand, feeling the warmth he had grown to depend on, the warmth that had brought his heart back to life. Thalia, he said, halting like a child learning to speak, I want you to be my wife. The words fell light as chalk dust, but struck deep as thunder. Thalia went still for a few beats, then her eyes shimmered, not from surprise but from the truth the two of them had long known. Tobias, she whispered, placing her hand over his chest where his heartbeat thudded. I want that too. A rare smile touched Tobias's mouth, thin as winter sunlight in Montana. He kissed her forehead, then held her close, feeling her breath settle against his own. At that moment, hoofbeats echoed at the end of the street. John Caldwell, owner of the largest cattle outfit in the region, rode up, his face stern. "Red," he called, "I need you." Tobias glanced at Talia, asking silently before stepping outside. Caldwell spoke fast. "Cattle prices in Fort Benton doubled. I need my best hand to push the herd north. 2 weeks out and back, maybe more. Pay for 3 months. The whole town's bracing for winter. You know how it is." Tobias knew. That money could set him and Talia on a strong start. New windows for the cabin, livestock, maybe even a garden with more than wild grass. But the timing, now of all times. He looked back at Thalia framed in the schoolhouse doorway, worry in her eyes though she said nothing. He understood the battle in her, joy just born, fear right behind it. "I'll go," Tobias said, his voice firm for that single moment. When Caldwell rode off, Tobias returned to Thalia. A heavy stillness settled between them, like the sky before a storm. "I have to do this," Tobias said, stepping closer, "so we can have the beginning we deserve." Thalia looked down at her hands, then up, her voice barely more than wind. "And the wedding?" "When I return," Tobias murmured. "The day I come back, we marry." Thalia bit her lip, fighting for calm. "Tobias, I trust you, but I'm afraid. Helena, the offer. So many things unclear, and now this." Tobias cupped her face in both hands, pulling her near. "Thalia Vance, you are the only thing certain in my life." Her gaze shook, then settled. "I'll wait." Tobias lowered his head and kissed her, not like the storm-lit night in the cabin, but slow, long, carrying the weight of a vow unspoken. His hands drew her closer, memorizing her shape before the days apart. Thalia answered his kiss with the tenderness he loved, but beneath it lay a fragile intuition, a shift in the wind. When Tobias finally drew back, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise," he said quietly. "I'll come home to you." Thalia closed her eyes, resting against him. "I'll keep that promise in my heart, until the day you return." But later that afternoon, when Tobias rode out of town, Thalia watched him until he was only a dark speck against the horizon. And something in the wind made her shiver. Their love had just begun. Yet fate had already laid its first trial at their door. 5 days after the herd left Elkridge, trouble found them. Snow came earlier than expected, wind from the north slicing through the plains. On the 7th night, when the cattle screamed at the sound of distant gunfire, Tobias knew the worst had arrived. A gang known along the Fort Benton route, reckless, bold, willing to shoot first, moved in under the cover of trees. Caldwell shouted, riders scattered, and snow mixed with mist turned the night into a blurred dream. Tobias rode toward the panicked herd. He caught sight of 2 shadows beneath the trees when gunfire cracked. His horse reared. Tobias fired back, driving the outlaws off, but then a sharp hiss cut through the air and into his side. The bullet tore across his ribs, burning like flame. Tobias fell from the saddle, hitting the frozen ground. Hooves churned mud and snow around him as the herd surged. Caldwell and 2 others reached him, drove the gang away, then dropped to their knees beside him. "Tobias, can you hear me?" Tobias tried to answer, but breath slipped in thin, broken threads. Snowflakes fell into his vision, and somewhere, close or far, he thought he heard Thalia's voice. "Tobias, don't leave me." They reached Fort Benton 3 brutal days later. Tobias burned with fever, his wound swollen and foul, his body shaking under layers of blankets. The local doctor cleaned the gash, bandaged it, then spoke bluntly. If he travels now, he may not live through the ride. But Tobias only whispered, as if making a vow. She's waiting for me. The doctor exhaled and finally allowed him to be sent south with the supply wagon, adding a warning. If the fever climbs, he won't survive. Tobias never heard that part. In his drifting mind, only Thalia's name moved with the rhythm of hooves. When the wagon reached Elkridge, the sky hung heavy and gray. Thalia was closing her classroom when she saw Sheriff Tanner at the door, wearing the expression she had last seen the day her parents died. Miss Vance, you need to get to Dr. Miller's, now. The chalk box fell from her hands. It's Tobias? He's alive, the sheriff said quickly, but weak. Talia ran. She didn't notice the cold or the street wawat or the voices calling. Only her pounding heart carried her to the back room of the doctor's house. Tobias lay there, face drained, lips cracked, breath shallow. Bandages across his side were soaked dark. His eyes were shut, his brow tight from pain. Dear God, Talia whispered, touching his forehead with a trembling hand. Tobias, can you hear me? I'm here. Dr. Miller sighed. High fever, deep infection. The next 24 hours will decide it. But Talia heard none of it. All she saw was Tobias's hand, the hand that had once trembled against her skin in the storm, now growing colder by the hour. She sat, took his hand in her lap, and began the longest vigil of her life. For 2 nights, Thalia never left the room. She wiped sweat from his face, changed the cold cloths, held his hand when the fever made his body convulse. At times he murmured her name, not clearly, not awake, but like a voice calling from some distant threshold. Thalia, don't go. Don't leave. Me. Her chest tightened. She leaned close, her voice shaking but unwavering. I'm not leaving, Tobias. I'm right here. I'm nowhere but here. Other times he gasped, eyes half open in delirium. I'm scared to lose you. Scared, like my father. Scared. Talia cupped his cheek, her tears falling onto his knuckles like early rain. You won't lose me. Not ever. But Tobias, you must fight. For you, for me, for the promise you made. Wind swept against the window, but inside the room there was only her steady whisper and his breaking breath. On the second night, his breathing turned suddenly strained. Thalia bolted upright, terror rushing through her. No, Tobias, not now, not this. She gripped his hand tight, as if pouring every bit of her life into him. You come back to me. You promise to marry me. You do not break that promise. As if hearing her, or as if her love was the rope holding him to this world, Tobias exhaled. A long breath, but steadier, deeper. Thalia pressed her palm to his forehead. The heat was gone. The fever had broken. Dr. Miller entered, his voice low but relieved. Fever's down. He'll live. Thalia didn't cry out. She only bowed her head over Tobias's hand and let out a breath she had been holding for 2 sleepless nights. Tobias read. Her choice, the man who once feared love, feared loss, had fought his way back. And at dawn, when he opened his eyes to find Thalia beside him, her face pale with worry but lit like morning, he knew he had returned to the place his heart meant to be. December arrived with a thin sweep of snow settling across the roofs of Elkridge. In that cold air, a warmth moved through town, not from the stoves, but from a story whispered for 2 weeks straight. Tobias Red lived, and he's marrying Thalia Vance. The news spread like lamplight in a winter night, quiet, yet bright enough to touch every heart. After the fever broke, Tobias recovered faster than Dr. Miller expected. Each morning, the first thing he saw was Thalia, her bright brown eyes, a small nod like a blessing for the day, and a smile that made miracles feel possible. One early morning, with snow dusting the windows, Tobias took her hand and said, in a voice steadier than either expected, "We're getting married. I'm not waiting another day." Talia placed her hand over his heart and whispered a yes more certain than any she'd ever spoken. "I've been waiting for this since the moment you opened your eyes and said my name." The wedding was set for the first Sunday of December. The small church, yellow wood rafters, plain glass windows, had never been so full. Every bench was taken. People from distant ranches came wrapped in fur coats, carrying pies, gifts, or simply a wish to witness the couple the whole town had grown to love. Aunt Evelyn sat in the front row, eyes wet, smile unhidden. Outside, snow drifted lightly. Not a storm, not wind, just soft white flakes, floating like a quiet blessing. Tobias stood at the altar, wearing a white shirt cleaner than any he'd owned. His hair was combed, the wound at his side still tender, but his heart beat like a drum against his ribs. When the church doors opened, Tobias looked up and forgot how to breathe. Thalia stepped inside. She wore a cream knit dress, simple and close to her shape. No lace, no veil, no glittering jewels, only herself, steady as early winter light. Her curls were pinned up, a few soft strands brushing her brow, her brown eyes fixed on the man waiting for her. Tobias had never looked at anyone that way. Not in awe, not in want, not in fear. Just whole. Thalia walked slowly, each step wiping away the hard years behind them and laying down a new path, one she would walk with him. When she reached him, Tobias held out his hand. She placed hers in it. And everything inside Tobias read, the man who once believed love meant death, went quiet, then opened like spring timber. Reverend Thomas smiled at them. He did not need many words. Everyone knew what they had endured to stand here. The vows rose in the small room. Tobias read, the Reverend said, "Do you promise to love, keep, and walk beside Thalia, in strength and in sickness, in plenty and in hardship, until your life's end?" Tobias met her eyes, and his voice was not just an answer, but a return to life. "I do." "Thalia Vance," the Reverend said, "do you choose Tobias as your companion, to build a home, to share burdens and joys, until the Lord stops your breath?" Talia tightened her grip, eyes bright. "I choose him, today and every day." The church held one silent beat, then applause rose like wind through pines. "From this moment," the Reverend said warmly, "I declare you husband and wife. May God bless this union." Tobias kissed Talia. It wasn't like the storm-lit kiss, nor the kiss born from fear of loss. It was a kiss of two souls granted another life. The celebration followed at Grange Hall, where neighbors brought apple cider, pies, fiddle music, and laughter enough to warm the entire valley. Tobias wasn't a strong dancer, but that night he never let go of Thalia's hand. Under the soft lamps they danced slow, foreheads touching, as if the world could fall away and they would still stand firm. "Tobias," Talia whispered as he drew her close, "we came back from the edge of death, just to live beside each other." He kissed her hair, his voice deep and sure as the ground beneath them. "I didn't just come back from death. I came back to live for the first time. Outside, snow fell quietly. Inside, two people who once wandered through loneliness had become a home for each other. And that Montana winter, cold as it was, became the warmest season of their lives. Winter passed more gently than usual. Maybe the snow fell light, or maybe the cabin by Elk Creek now held 2 lamps instead of 1. Tobias often woke early, stepped outside into the cold breath rising off the ground like thin mist, then turned back to find Talia tying her curls by the fire. Each morning like that made him believe his life had taken a turn too beautiful to have ever belonged to him. The cabin changed little by little, quiet and steady. Tobias built a small room on the east side, where the first light would fall. Every nail he drove carried an image in his mind. Thalia sitting by the window with a book, sunlight touching her face the way roots touch earth. Thalia, between school hours and caring for Aunt Evelyn, devoted herself to the small garden behind the cabin. The winter ground was stubborn, but she worked patiently, loosening each patch, mixing in manure, planting the yellow seeds she brought from town. Tobias watched from the porch, pretending to work, though he mostly watched the way she bent toward the soil, her dark hands covered in earth, her eyes bright with simple joy. "What are you doing there?" Talia asked once without looking up. "Watching the wind," Tobias said. She laughed, soft as a shard of winter sun. "No, watching me." He didn't deny it. He walked down and set his coat over her shoulders. "Wind's strong. Come inside." "But I'm not done." "The ground will stay," Tobias murmured. I won't let freeze." She held his gaze long enough to warm him, then stood, though the smile tugged at her lips. Their evenings were simple. Bean soup, hot tea, sitting by the fire while the wood snapped. Tobias practiced reading aloud, slow but steady, while Talia leaned into his shoulder. Thalia learned to mend his coat, though sometimes the stitches wandered so far he had to swallow a laugh. Nights like that were nothing grand, yet they were the best Tobias had ever known. One day, when the snow began melting into thin streams, Thalia stood at the window, still and thoughtful. Tobias rested his hammer at his hip, wiping sweat, noticing the unusual quiet in her stance. "Something wrong?" he asked. Thalia turned, lips pressed together, not sadness, but holding a secret. "I need you to sit." Tobias dropped the hammer at once and stepped toward her, uneasy like a boy summoned by the preacher. Talia took his hand and placed it against the flat of her stomach, beneath her wool dress. "Tobias," she said, voice trembling faintly, "I think we're going to have a baby." The world paused. Tobias stared at his hand on her stomach, at the place where a new life stirred, and then at Talia's face filled with hope and fear at once. Words tried to come, but his throat failed. A feeling too large rose inside him, enough to shake his hand. "You sure?" he whispered, voice thin as wind slipping through leaves. Talia nodded, her eyes bright as creek water. "Very sure." Tobias drew a long breath, then bent down, pressing his forehead into her hand resting over her belly. A broken sound came from him. Not pain, but the sound of a man meeting something more sacred than his own life. "God, Talia," he murmured, voice unsteady. "I never thought I deserved something like this." Talia knelt, cupping his face, making him look at her. Tobias read, "You're wrong. You do deserve it. And our child deserves a good man like you for a father." Tobias blinked hard, trying to stop the heat building at the corners of his eyes. In all his grown years, he had never cried before anyone, but now, with her hand guiding his to where life had begun, he didn't fight it. He let it come. the tears of a man who once believed his heart had died long ago. "I'll do everything to keep you both safe," Tobias said, voice low, steady as a vow spoken under the December church roof. "I promise." Talia rested her forehead against his, in the small cabin warmed by firelight on 4 plain walls. "And I promise," she whispered, "we'll build this life, one day at a time, together." Outside, the last snow melted into streams winding toward Elk Creek, as if nature itself was clearing the path for a new season. A season where they were not only loving, but waiting for a quiet miracle to take shape. Spring of 1879 came late, but when it reached Elk Creek, the valley woke as if from a long sleep. Snow thinned into small streams cutting through fresh grass. Trees along the bank pushed out pale leaves, and the wind carried the smell of wet soil, new growth, and beginnings. The homestead changed too. No longer a lone cabin in the wide grassland, it had become a living place. Winter carrots pushing up green, the yellow flowers Thalia planted now open, and the new room Tobias built catching the first light each morning as if greeting the day. Each afternoon, when work paused, they sat on the porch facing the sweep of grass, touching the foothills. Thalia often leaned her head on Tobias's shoulder, her hand resting on the growing curve of her belly. Tobias, once the man who always kept his back to a wall, now sat open, letting someone rest against him as the most natural part of life. Late in May, a light wind carried the scent of sun-warmed grass. Tobias was sharpening a hoe when Thalia called to him. "Come here," she said, her voice soft as fading light. He set the tool aside, wiped his hands, and stepped onto the porch. Thalia tapped the spot beside her. "Sit. The baby's kicking. I want you to feel it." Tobias sat slowly, not from pain, but because wonder still made him careful. She guided his hand to her belly. In the quiet, still as if the valley held its breath, he felt a faint movement. Barely there, but enough to break his rhythm. Tobias's eyes softened, lashes unsteady. "God," he whispered, "it's really here." "Here," Thalia said, smiling. "Between us." Tobias bent, brushing his lips over her hand, an instinct so natural it startled him. He had always believed he loved by guarding, by doing, by silence. But since Thalia, he had learned love also meant letting himself be unguarded in the right hands. They sat until the sun slipped behind the ridge, the wind drifting over the grass in small waves, as if carrying the sky with it. Tobias took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing with hers. "Thalia," he said, voice low but steady, "I spent my life thinking I'd walk alone. My father loved my mother so deeply, he couldn't live after she died. I thought that was a warning, that love was walking into loss." Thalia didn't interrupt. She listened the way she always had, quiet, steady, leaving him unjudged. But then, Tobias drew a long breath, eyes on the creek catching the sun. "When I thought I'd lose you, lying in that room thinking I'd never see you again, I understood something." She held his hand, her voice soft. "What did you understand?" Tobias turned toward her. His eyes held the warmth of a winter fire, but the depth of roots reaching through the earth. "The greatest risk isn't loving," he said quietly. "It's refusing to love. I almost missed everything because I was afraid." Thalia rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes as if tucking those words into her heart. "But you chose love," she whispered. "You chose me." "And you chose me," Tobias answered, gentle as a prayer. A woodpecker swept past the porch, its wings mixing with the sound of the creek, and the wind through the grass. Together they made the music of the West, where life was never easy, yet always held small things worth living for. When dusk settled, Tobias wrapped an arm around her and drew her close. She leaned into him, breath steady, warm, trusting. "I think our child," Talia murmured, "will grow in a beautiful world, not because it's simple, but because it has us." Tobias smiled, two hearts stronger than one. "And three hearts," she said, touching her belly. Tobias laughed, rare, honest, then pressed a kiss to her forehead. Outside, the Montana plains stretched wide and quiet. But on the porch of the Elk Creek cabin, two people who had survived loss and trial had found the firmest ground of their lives. Not land, not harvest, not safety, but a love strong enough to build a whole life again.